So it's 6 o'clock. Hello and welcome to our monthly community conversation looking at the consequences of the COVID lockdown, and this time on sports in Bath. My name is Matt McCabe. I'm a senior advisor to Wera Hobhouse, and I will be comparing the question and answer session later. And before Vera begins, I just want to run through some of the rules. All your mics and your videos will be muted. This does help people with poor connectivity keep the signal. They're not downloading too many video feeds. Be lots of time for questions at the end. Please submit your questions using the chat function on the side there. You can send questions to me privately, or you can post them for everyone to see, including comments along the way. And just a reminder, this event is being recorded, so enjoy. And I'll hand over to Vera.
Thank you, Matt, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us and my guest speakers tonight for this important topic at a very critical moment. We are in our second lockdown, and when we organized this event, we didn't really think we would be here again, but here we are. So it is a particular pleasure to welcome my panel today. We have got Tarquin McDonald from Bath Rugby. We have got Caroline Searle from Team Bath. We've got Nick Blofeld from Bath City Football Club. And we have Liam Johnson from the Bath Racecourse. It is, you know, such an important time to talk about how do our sports events and venues survive during the COVID time. And of course, you're providing so much sports activities, sporting venues, playing sports, watching sports. All of this has stopped during lockdown, but also, of course, you are providing a lot of community activities. And as we have known and heard and understand very well, is that physical activity, physical exercise, but also enjoying something different from sitting at home is just such an important thing to do while we are all psychologically trying to cope with this pandemic. It is so very important to hear from all of you from this very broad spectrum of things that our sporting venues in Bath are providing. And we want to understand really how we are coping, how you're coping financially, but also how we make sure that once we're coming out of this lockdown, we can do this well, and how we are preparing for coming out of the lockdown, and how we all together sort of make sure that there's a resilience within everything that we do around sporting activities, sporting facilities, and so on and so forth. I hear a bit of background noise from people from the audience. Can you please make sure that you can turn your microphones off so that we can hear what our panelists are saying. So my first panelist up tonight is Tarquin McDonald, the Chief Executive of Bath Rugby. Bath Rugby is, as we probably all know, one of the leading teams in the Gallagher Premiership, and the Bath Rugby Foundation works across the city and beyond. Tarquin, it is very, very good to see you here. Your season stopped suddenly in March before commencing again in June. What was that like for the club? Weren't you involved in a trial to bring fans back, and how did that go? Tarquin.
Hi Vera, hi everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invite and organising this evening. You're right, the season rightly paused in March, shortly before we went into the first lockdown. It was actually August in terms of games recommencing. But if I go back to March, and you know, whereas maybe this time we have more a sense of what we're going into, we didn't know what we were going into. Games were stopping, there were no crowds. We have a sport where face-to-face contact is a significant part of the sport, and that's obviously how this virus is transmitted. So we were going into this not knowing when or what the solution might be for us to play. And there was huge uncertainty where we have around 130 staff, and for all of our staff, some of them affected, they have partners who are working at the RUH who are on the front line, or people who are affected And then as an organisation, we, like many organisations, we went through pay cuts, furlough, sadly some redundancy as well. And I think on a day-to-day level, and this is particularly for our rugby players and staff, they're very much every day they're in the training environment, or not quite every day, but most days of the week, they're in the training environment together. And it's very much a shared experience. And they were at home and they were on their own. And that was just from a basic well-being perspective, incredibly unusual for them. So we spent a huge amount of time keeping our people, staff and players connected. And what was really important for us is being clear about what we couldn't control, which was quite a lot, but then being clear about what we could control. And that was how we showed up as an organisation. So lots of communication, all of our staff and players being honest about what we do and what we don't know, and being really clear about how we wanted to emerge stronger as a club. And you know, this honesty and how we approached it was really important for us, and that showed up in terms of our performances post-lockdown when we did emerge into restart. You mentioned our foundation, and our foundation had a loss of certainly 25% of its funding pretty much immediately, which is pretty huge. And again, staff went on to furlough, but pretty quickly we turned not just to the foundation internally, but looking to the needs within the community. And there was a flagship program that was launched, the Summer Breakout, which was a 6-week program, particularly for young people and children, providing nutrition, support for families, feeding, some work experience, some help in terms of employment and reskilling. And we had 328 participants, 24 partner organisations. We were immensely proud of what we were able to do with that. So we tried to be outward looking as well as inward looking. You mentioned there, Vera, the test pilot event, and we had applied and we had approval for a test pilot event on the 22nd of September against Gloucester with 1,000 fans. And we prepared for that. Our supporters were, those who got the golden ticket were delighted to be coming, which was great. They were excited to be coming back in. You know, it was incredibly safe the way it was organised, staggered arrival times, health checks, temperature checks. And then at 11:30 in the morning on the day, DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, sent an email to cancel it, because it was the day the government was making an announcement about various restrictions. Apologies for the background noise. Various restrictions, including their statement that crowds might not return until the end of March. So, you know, it was very disappointing that we were unable to welcome back fans. Obviously, safety is paramount at that time before the second lockdown. I think the frustration we felt, and I'm sure other sports would say the same, was that the O2 was allowed indoor music events with 5,000 fans, or we saw pictures of Arsene Wenger with a book launch event at London Palladium with a not very socially distanced crowd inside. And so I think one of the real challenges is we all understand this is uncharted territory, but it's been some of the inconsistency with which sport has been treated compared to other sectors that is and has been incredibly challenging.
So I think what I hear, there's two things. A, that the messages are inconsistent. And sometimes I worry personally that people haven't quite understood what it is that actually spreads the virus, and how we have to relearn it. It is difficult to behave differently, in terms of our social contacts. And obviously, you can't play rugby differently. It's not possible. But one can gradually come to a point where spectators, behave differently when they're watching a game. And if they're not being, if they don't see that we are all adapting about social distance and wearing our face coverings, and there's still so many people who don't do the right thing, then it's damaging for everybody, but ultimately particularly hitting those organizations and venues like sporting venues who could actually come back and provide entertainment and fun and outdoor activities if only it was better understood within the public at large of what is safe and what isn't safe. And then the other thing that I hear is that the government doesn't let you know in advance. They make very quick knee-jerk reactions. And for that reason, it is very, very difficult for you to plan. And to be quite honest, I think this is a criticism that the government has got all round. It's the same for school leaders would say the same thing. For goodness sake, can you not scenario plan and then be a bit transparent about, you know, if that, then this, if that, then that? Would you think that that is a sort of way forward?
Yeah, I think the certainly the uncertainty is, you know, is very challenging. I think it's not easy for the government. It's obviously a fast-moving landscape, but I think for anyone in terms of, you know, how we move into the future, being able to find some way of planning is really important. It's, I mean, for us, it's, you know, it's not really possible, I would say, to plan in the traditional sense. But, you know, for us as an organisation, the process of planning and gaming scenarios has become part of what we have to do. And I mean, you talked, Vera, about the transmission of COVID within the sport. There is face-to-face contact within rugby. We've got some incredibly well-managed protocols for how we manage our rugby bubble for training and our players and what we do around that. But, you know, some of that uncertainty is we might have one or two cases within our team, and then we have to track and trace, and that can have an impact on our ability to deliver our sport, to deliver our game. I think you know, we don't blame the government for the fact that it's, you know, it is a fast-moving landscape. I think the really key thing is two things from our side. It is that consistency between different sectors. So the arts, there was a £1.5 billion aid package for the arts, which absolutely necessary and absolutely critical. Sport's not been able to open its doors, and yet there's been no aid for sport. And you know, if I talk about rugby, it's not just at the Premiership level, from a community level below the professional leagues. Competitive rugby has been cancelled for this season. And you know, the impact of sport is not just what happens on a Saturday, which is that moment of inspiration and joy normally when people come together, hopefully, or, you know, it can be sadness sometimes when the game doesn't go so well. But every year we engage 6,000 children through our community programme across Dorset, Somerset and Wiltshire. We are at the moment, despite everything that's going on, we've reallocated resource from our ticket office. We're not selling any tickets in terms of a programme to try and deliver greater participation in girls sport, girls rugby, which is really important. And there's obviously our foundation, but then you look at the amateur clubs across our community, and if there is no rugby, they have no subs, you know, no income from their players. And also the risk that, you know, in some of their senior teams, people might drift away from the game. So there's there is, at one level, there's funding, but I think the risk, if there isn't support, is that there's a significant long legacy of people moving away from participation in sport, which is, it's terrible for any sport. It's got well-being and, significant health impacts as well. So I think whilst the voices in sport may well have been led by the professional teams, it's really important that the government fully understands that these decisions they make have a long tail, and not just at the elite level. It's throughout communities and the role that sport plays in the community.
I mean, if I may ask, how long can you continue without gate receipts?
Well, the Premiership clubs are losing on average £750,000 to £1 million a month, because 2/3 of our income comes through gate receipts, ticketing, hospitality, and the RFU. And without any crowds, there are, I would say, there are one or two Premiership clubs that might not make it into the new year. So this problem is real, and it's significant.
Indeed. There was one one other thing that you mentioned that resonated with something that I discussed with the Director for Public Health only a week ago, long when we were still discussing or hoping that we could keep in tier 1 and what was needed for all of us to understand what it would be that would keep us in the lowest level of restrictions. And what Bruce Lawrence said, our local director for public health, was the interesting thing is that what happens is you get very well regulated places. So you know what to do. Let's say as a kid in the classroom, it's all very marked out, and you sanitize your hands and you wear your face coverings or whatever it is. And then you get out of your regulated space and you start relax back into just normal social behavior, which is simply not about two meters apart. It's just not a normal thing for us to do. And what I like to say to people when they go past me, please don't talk to me, because that's the moment when you could ultimately transmit the virus. And it is you're still in this space where our natural human behavior doesn't really work at all with what COVID does to us. And it is the unregulated spaces that are actually where we are most likely to transmit the virus, not where organizations like you have actually, absolutely marked out what is safe, what isn't safe, what to do, what not to do. As soon as you let go, people relax back into normal social behavior, which is not wearing a face covering, not being 2 meters apart from each other. I think that it might be one of the big problems.
Yeah, I think certainly one of the, I mean, you're right. So firstly, from a team perspective, again, because any players having a positive case, it can have such an impact on performance. We've been rigorous with the players in terms of, they'll be in our training environment in the bubble, and then they go home to their families. But everything that they do, we've rigorously enforced, and overall they've been incredibly good. So whether that was by, normally they would go to gyms, not just within our training environment, but there were places that they wouldn't go because we just couldn't take the risk. I think on a wider point in terms of crowds and games, I think, and I believe that one of the major concerns from government, from public health, is not so much the 80 minutes, the 90 minutes, depending, rugby, football, whatever it might be, that people are in the ground. It's the transport to and from the ground where there's the concern about risk of transmission. Now, in a socially distant stadium, the crowd is significantly reduced. So for us, as opposed to 14,500, it could be 3,500 people. And we're located in the city centre. So some people come by train, they walk, they cycle, they drive. It's a bit different for us than other venues. I think one of the frustrations, I would say, is that when the government announced no crowds until the end of March, on the same day they announced a specific sports technology and innovation group, a STIG task force that was being led to identify ways to address this problem, particularly around risk of transmission, the whole fan journey from home to stadium and back. And as far as we're aware, over 6 weeks, there hasn't been a single development that's come from this group. And so I think, on behalf of everyone involved with sport, that's incredibly disappointing that a group was set up 6 weeks ago to address this issue. And we'd love to feed into that. We'd love to contribute. And at the moment, we're not aware that anything's come out from that, which is frustrating.
And now, and I think this is one of the important points to raise. We've got 4 weeks, maybe longer, but to use this lockdown proactively in order to identify things that can be done and developed, to make sure that, when we come out, we are even more resilient, and we don't sort of flip-flop between opening up and going back into lockdowns. And I think to address exactly this thing, first of all, everybody can contribute that we don't go into the next lockdown, and look at their own behavior, but also to probably then address, as you say, even more, address things that can be not regulated, but at least sort of where people understand where the risk of transmission is. And if it's not in the ground, it's when people are coming to the ground, and that we develop even better understanding where then we are creating risk and reducing them. Thank you, Tarquin. We are moving on now to Nick Blofeld. Thank you very much, Nick, for joining us. You are the chair of Bath City Football Club. The Bath City is now community owned. Have you had similar experiences to Tarquin? I tried to very much come behind at the time to support you and lobby the government to make sure that we could bring a small controlled crowd back into our community venues. Again, it didn't quite end up where I wanted it to be, but tell us about your experience and let me also understand, and everybody else in this group, how we can help.
Yeah, no, we really appreciated your support, Vera. It was a difficult time, but you pushing hard and trying to get those questions in Parliament was much appreciated. There are some similarities and some significant differences with the rugby club. We're run by volunteers, so we haven't had to make anybody redundant, which is great. We only have 2.5 full-time employees. They've been furloughed. They were just about to come back, and then everything changed again. So they're probably going to be, well, they are going to be on furlough probably for another month or so now. And the players themselves are part-time as well. So some of them, quite a few of them do have other jobs. Although I don't think the coaches, and certainly Jerry Gill treats it as part-time. He's very much full-time. But it's been frustrating. The other good piece of news, again, I feel for Tarquin, I know the situation he's in. We do have a small amount of support now. I think it came from the lottery funding, but earlier in the month or last month, we were told we had 3 months of support in effect. So we have enough now to cover us each month for the next 3 months. We're sort of anticipating it going to 6 months, but we are getting some financial support now, which has helped us hugely. I think we were in contact earlier there, and we thought we would probably survive until Christmas. This allows us certainly to survive the other side of Christmas, but it's still very, very tight. But we've minimized all our costs. We don't have very many anyway. And in terms of what's the difference between sort of being owned by your supporters rather than by an individual or an organization, and we're very interactive. We like to get feedback. We consult very regularly with them. And the other big difference is that at the end of the season, we closed down for a while, and then they decided we were going to do the playoffs. We couldn't afford to play the playoffs. So we crowdfunded, and within 2 days, we'd raised more than we needed, which was fantastic. And it was a brilliant response from all sorts of people. And we ended up losing in the first round, but actually we kept the excess, for want of a better word. We consulted with them, and it gave us a little bit more in the bank to survive another month or so longer in these tough situations.
So yeah, first of all, I have to say also from my very recent experience about addressing the food hunger and the food issue in Bath for children during holidays, I have to say I'm overwhelmed how generous people in Bath are, and we are very, very lucky. And I think we have to appreciate as a community how lucky we are, how we can often within a short period of time find very generous people who help us out. But of course, it's not a long-term solution. As much as we can all pull together, ultimately, it is about the long-term financial survival of all our sporting venues. So you said you can just about you hope you can now survive beyond Christmas. But I mean, it's not just about the players. And first of all, tell us a little bit about how your players responded. But you're also very much a community club. You're providing activities for young people, outdoors activities. So apart from the financial worries, a lot of it is also about how we are providing something that we have identified as being, very, very important for the well-being of our young people, for the cohesion of our the community around Twerton. I mean, all of those things might also be in danger, aren't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to pick up on the players, I think they've responded very well. And I think Jerry Gill is very strong on culture, and he's pretty good on WhatsApp and technology as well. So he's engaged with them pretty regularly. And we've got all similar protocols probably to Tarquin. The league weren't particularly helpful, but we've shared information around the clubs at this lower grassroots level. So we're able to learn from others, which has been great. So this whole culture of sharing I think has been fantastic. We've seen it in all areas of society, but even at small grassroots club football level, it's been invaluable. And in terms of sort of outreach activities, we've got two strands to it. We have our own sort of community department, and then we have our own Bath City Foundation. They do a fantastic job, primarily targeting the children in the area. And as Tarquin said, it's about getting and keeping kids active. And those that don't have access to the great facilities that some of the nice schools in Bath have, those that don't have access, it's great for them to get it through clubs and foundations and things like that. And in terms of our own activities, we're a community anchor organisation in many ways. And it's been tough because the supporters haven't been able to engage. They feel a bit disconnected. It'll be fantastic if we can only get a few people, but if we get some of the crowds back. We've managed to carry out social outreach programs using social media and the old-fashioned telephone as well. We've been calling people up who we know are vulnerable, which has been great. It's nice for them to hear a friendly voice, often elderly people living on their own. So that's worked extremely well. We've had to pause some of our community activities, particularly the Citizens Advice Legal Clinic. We haven't been able to deliver that. And the food pantry that was planned, we couldn't deliver that either. But what we have done is we've probably got tighter as a community and a network around Twerton, Whiteway and Southdown. So that's been very positive. We've managed to turn some of the space that wasn't being used at the club into drop-in centres for students to hand over kit they don't necessarily need and reallocate that amongst the community, like old computers and things like that. So whilst it's been tough, it's been restrictive, we still have kept things going and just try to be as positive as possible using old-fashioned telephone, social media, whatever we could, really.
Yes, and I think the resilience around anything that we do is about sort of trying to continue to be positive and sometimes very creative, isn't it? So sometimes necessity is actually the mother of invention, or whatever people say, that you suddenly find ways of doing things differently that while you were just keeping along doing your normal thing, you didn't think
exactly.
of.
Yeah.
Suddenly we've got this sort of imposed pause on us that gives us opportunities to think again. Thank you very much, Nick. My next guest is Liam Johnson. You are the Executive Director at Bath Racecourse, and it would be great to hear from you, Liam. What else, apart from horse racing, do you actually provide to our community in Bath? But of course, do talk about horse racing as well.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Well, first of all, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Vera, for inviting me today. Yeah, there's obviously lots of similar challenges, which I'll probably touch on, which has already been echoed on this forum already. But in terms of the racecourse, we actually only race 22 times a year. So many people think racing all year round, but actually at Bath Racecourse, we operate between April and October, so just during the summer season, 22 fixtures. So aside from that, sort of diversifying our assets essentially and trying to commercialise what we can has been a massive paramount part of our business for many years. But actually on the more community aspects of the racecourse, you know, we deliver several events throughout the month, which are actually critical locally. For example, blood donation sessions. So many people that do give blood locally may well actually visit the racecourse to do that. Equally, school events as well. We have a huge amount of space up here, just under 200 acres of land with various internal facilities. So quite often for charity events and school events, we'll often use our facilities and obviously to utilise that for them. So at the moment, none of that is actually happening aside from the blood donor session. So from a community impact point of view, you know, it has been significant. But equally, we're a commercial organisation as well. So again, having various sort of types of assets on site, from bars to restaurants to private hospitality suites, very similar to Tarquin's challenge, I guess, as well. At the moment, they're not being operated commercially, which for a racecourse of Bath size, our turnover within that sort of corporate market for those events is roughly just under 3 million per year. So at the moment, that is on hold. There's nothing actually happening. So that is actually putting, you know, further pressure on that. But like I say, we are utilised for everything from weddings to meeting spaces. You know, you name it, the racecourse does it. Actually, we've had a circus here before and dog shows. You know, we really have diversified what we can do here. But ultimately, to sort of compensate for those days we're not racing, there's quite a few.
Yes, I remember there was a great big charity event, actually a human race going along, I think a year and a half ago, when everybody was doing a great big I can't remember, I think it was for some cancer charity where you had a massive community event. And you know, again, we are lucky to have you there on the hill, sometimes a bit chilly when you go the wind blows. And I've also noticed that actually some horse races definitely did take place, because the racing tips on Radio 4 mentioned the odd runner on Bath, at Bath. So you did actually do some horse racing over the summer. So how many races did you have?
Yeah, so we went into lockdown obviously in the March. Our season was scheduled to start in the March, so we actually didn't start until June. So we lost 5 or 6 of our opening fixtures due to that reason. So out of the 22, we delivered 15, all behind closed doors, all with obviously very stringent measures in place. Quite frankly, that enabled us to survive just through our betting and media income. So without that, we'd be in a much more tricky position.
So, but you still have got some people who come into the racecourse, and in fact, we might have a conversation later, also around that, you know, about the inconsistencies that I heard, that you know you allow, you know, people into a club room to see the sport from inside, when actually, why can't they go outside? I can't quite remember who mentioned that earlier. Was it Nick? Was it Tarquin? Or maybe you, Leo? You know, that actually is completely balmy, that there are restrictions that mean that people watch the game inside or a race inside, when actually, why don't they go outside where it is a lot safer?
Absolutely. I mean, we're quite fortunate that at Bath we're part of a larger organisation. So across our portfolio, we have 16 other racecourses. But to touch on Tarquin's point, actually, with regards to the preparation that went into welcoming crowds, one of our other racecourses up in Doncaster was identified as a pilot site for crowds. And the cost of that was quite frightening, really. And the fact it was cancelled pretty much on day one was hugely frustrating. But bringing it back into Bath, we also looked at our own event plans and our own management plans in order to bring the crowds. But ultimately, when you're seeing events cancelled, again, similar to Tarquin there, when you're seeing events cancelled so last minute, it makes it very hesitant to move forward. As a pilot scheme now, would Bath Racecourse want to do it? I mean, we would certainly try, but there would have to be some sort of financial recognition to say, if we are going to be utilised as a pilot site, it needs to be reimbursed if there are obviously issues and it's cancelled so last minute. And
have you got any plans for the future?
We did have many plans for the future. I mean, typically at Bath, for example, you know, across our 22 fixtures, we'll have just under 200,000 people through the gate of our race day. And typically, you know, we are a very sort of socially led sport. So, for example, we had Kaiser Chiefs booked in one of our music nights, which would have welcomed over 13,000 people. So we have tried to replicate a similar programme for 2021, but at the moment, planning and budgeting and all those things that go with that, you know, is extremely tricky, so we are looking at ways, but in terms of plans, hopefully, you know, if we do welcome crowds back, it will time potentially quite nicely when we engage back in April, and we'll obviously deliver a summer programme with events, and again, whilst factoring any social distancing that might be in place, because ultimately the commercial viability of delivering these events, you know, with restrictions also comes into question. I mentioned a second ago our capacity for our music nights at 13,000. If we're implementing social distancing and if we're implementing various restrictions, very well reduced down to 2,000 or 3,000. So therefore, the proposition that we create from entertainment value is obviously commercially viable. So that also puts it into question. So whilst planning, we're very optimistic, but we also have to.
And if, I mean, I don't know whether anybody has got an answer here, but if one of the worst things for all of you is always, you know, the short-termism of the decisions that are being made. So the difficulty of plan anything, if it then gets cancelled at the last minute, is there anything that we can do to help the government to not always put us back into this position where everything is sort of short-term, or should we just accept, oh, well, the COVID is just this sort of beast that we can't control? Or is there actually, in your mind, something where the government could do better in order to allow a bit more long-term planning?
I think it's very tricky for the government, because ultimately I guess the volatility of infection rates and the perception it has, and the PR pressure, I guess, liver events is huge. So we completely understand that. But equally, I think the local government particularly may need to sort of trust these venues to be able to follow the restrictions that's been outlined by the government and the DCMS and invested into in order to deliver those sort of measures and restrictions in place, and have that trust in venues to deliver. Because, you know, we all go shopping weekend to our local supermarket. I'd imagine that we'd all feel safer at Bath football or rugby or the Racecourse with the measures in place in the outdoor space as well. So I think it's having that trust in the venues to deliver is absolutely critical.
You're ever so slightly breaking up. I don't know whether the audience has got the same thing. Did you say it's a local government who has to play a role, or did you say it's government?
I think it's both. I think if the national government are giving more restrictions to the local government and how the guidance is perceived locally, I think it's a combination of the two. So
are you saying the government should ultimately also give local authorities a bit more freedom to make their own decisions? And also because, you know, local, I always think local is better because you know your local area better. So once the central government gives local government a little bit more freedom for their own decision making, we could actually in those parameters have a local discussion that might ultimately be more useful. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there is going to be a tiered system moving forward, then surely the local approach has to be considered. But equally, I understand there has to be a sort of national governance across that. But I think you said there at the start of the call, you know, in terms of this region, and particularly Bath, you know, it's been very low in terms of, you know, the impact of the virus from an infection point of view. So surely the local side of it has to come into play.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, of course, it is true we had a relatively low infection rates, and that we were very proud of it. It is worth remembering and reminding people that actually, in fact, infection rates across the southwest were the fastest rising. And you know, I was sort of sitting here worrying greatly that at which point would we go into a higher tier, and the cities are, of course, the areas that are first affected. So Bristol was a fastest rising numbers in infection, and Bath was closely followed. So in that sense, we were possibly just about lucky that the lockdown came while we were still in tier 1. And another question is, of course, are all areas just going back to their tiers after the full lockdown? And for me, of course, it would be one of the most important things that we try to be in the lowest tier of lockdown when we come out, and then stay there. And again, I think we can all do something about it, but I think it would also be important to understand which tiers are we going back to, and that government makes it clear you're going back into the tier that you were in before lockdown, or are they looking at the numbers and say, well, you guys, you're now going into tier 2 according to the numbers that we still see locally. And those clarifications, again, I think would probably be very useful. And I don't know whether you've put your mind to that, but that's certainly something that is going through my mind. We are coming to our last panelist for this evening, Caroline Searle. But before I let you speak, I just want to now encourage our audience to sort of start thinking of what questions you want to ask. I have so far not seen anybody using the chat function. Please use the chat functions to put in if you want to ask a question, what question it is. And Matt will then open up for questions from the audience. But you have to put them in there first. So start getting your thinking and your questions into the chat room, please. But you've got about sort of 5 to 10 minutes while I'm talking to Caroline to prepare them. Caroline, so let me introduce you. You are a sports consultant, but also on the leadership team at Team Bath. Very much appreciated that you're here this evening. The Sports Village at Bath Uni and Team Bath in particular cater not just for elite athletes, but also for local residents and for sports clubs. Just what is the scale of your community involvement?
Thank you very much, Vera. I think it's important to say that this standout facility that we have at the top of the hill was actually brought to Bath and is part of, you know, a fairly unique bit of our DNA by a combination of the local council, Bath Rugby, Bath City at the time. We all worked together to get Bath noticed in the race to get some lottery funding to build the facilities. And so we feel we're a custodian of something that we hope the city is proud of. You asked about community involvement, because I think sometimes people think of us as a place where students play sport and as a place where elite athletes play sport, but about 1.5 million people in any given year use the facilities at the Sports Training Village from the local community, but also from across the region and the country. We have 4,500 people from local clubs use the facilities every month. That's on top of the 18,000 student sports pass holders, because obviously it's a very important part of student experience to play sport either competitively or recreationally. And within that, there's some pockets of real activity right across the swimming pyramid and the tennis pyramid. We have thousands of under 18s that come in to either start the sport or develop the sport. And when we shut down, it was quite emotional, because normally the place hums, but it was very eerie just before lockdown 1.
So you had to work out which sports could start again, and now it's lockdown 2. What does that mean for Team Bath and your facilities at the Sports Village?
Well, at the moment, if I look back to how we reconstructed that jigsaw, if you like, because it's about 1.5 million people playing about 40 sports at different levels. So piecing that back together and understanding the government regulations as we reopened was quite difficult. We understand we'll probably have to go through it again, hopefully in later in December, but who knows when the lockdown will finish. So it is a complicated jigsaw, but we approached it with what can we do? What can we control? What can we do to bring people back to the things that they love doing, but to bring them back safely? That was hugely important to us, and it will be the same when we come out of lockdown next time round. That means we've had to put a huge number of protocols in place right across the facilities to provide hand sanitizers and one-way systems and density booking systems so that we capped the numbers of people within each element of the Sports Training Village. So we anticipate having to do all of that again. One of the things that we enjoyed doing during lockdown 1 was that we developed a whole platform of online fitness and activities for people, which people can still access on YouTube at Team Bath TV. Some very funny moments of our trainers encouraging people to because they didn't have weights at home, to use cans of beans during their exercises, and to use a dining room chair quite creatively. So that was good fun, and we're repeating that again this time round, just to keep people connected with our expert trainers and to offer them things that they can do indoors or outdoors during this current lockdown.
Yeah, there were, of course, wonderful sort of YouTube clips going around online as well, you know, about sort of the ping pong, you know, I think there was a Chinese family with their ping pong on the dining room table. And I mean, you can also get inspired. And I mean, I always find, fortunately, there's such a thing as a sense of humor, which have entertained me greatly, but also sort of sharing some ideas. I know in the summer it was easier, and in the winter it will be even more challenging for allowing people to exercise and keep fit. I mean, to be quite honest, you know what I do? I go up and down the stairs. I mean, in desperation, if there's nothing else to do because it's raining outside and you can't go anywhere to exercise, go up and down the stairs and sort of start running up and down the stairs. I know it's boring, but I think keeping fit is just one of the most important things that we can do, also for our physical and mental well-being. But you know, people have been talking about the danger of people falling off. Did you find that actually numbers had dropped when you sort of carefully started to start up again, or did people actually come back?
I think there was an inevitable fear factor of people having isolated themselves and then having to step back into an environment where they were perhaps exercising next to someone else. But there was some very, very good work done collaboratively with the sports bodies nationally, so that we understood how to mark out our exercise studios so that people had their own space within it, how to ensure that people didn't share equipment during classes, and that everything was sprayed down and disinfected in between sessions. And I've got to say tribute to our cleaners. It's a massive building to clean, and they're doing it very regularly every day.
Yeah, I think you're mentioning that there's something that is the problem all around, that people are starting to get institutionalized. You know, you're spending more time at home. You're starting to become more and more worried about being infected, and again, communicating what is safe and what isn't safe is probably a massive challenge. But just one last thing about the fitness of your athletes. I mean, you're training elite athletes, as well as local residents and sporting groups. And what does all of this mean for competitive sport? How do the top athletes keep fit?
Well, thank you for asking me that question in a week when our first athlete has been named for Tokyo, Vicky Holland, the triathlete. So Bath has an Olympian who's been selected for Tokyo. The government produced some return to training protocols for elite athletes during the first lockdown. And we followed those rigorously with the national governing bodies that look after the squads that use our facilities. And that worked pretty well. Swimming was the first squad to return, and they started back in training in June. I think we have to help. Whilst it may seem a privilege for Olympic athletes to be able to access our facilities during lockdown, it is also a very short time frame to Tokyo, and we need to keep people competitive vis-a-vis other nations who maybe don't have as many restrictions. So all of that was very, very carefully worked out, and we'll just go back to those protocols as we are in this current lockdown. Really, I think out of our competitive athletes, the ones that are probably struggling more than others and have parallels with Bath Rugby and Bath City is obviously our Super League netball team, who play in netball's equivalent of the Premiership or football's equivalent of the Premier League. And we have, I'm sorry if you can hear fireworks in the background, by the way. I think the whole street has decided to have little firework things happening outside just as I'm speaking. But so the complication with netball obviously is at the elite level, it's played indoors, it's not played outdoors. And we have some very talented and dedicated athletes in a sport which doesn't necessarily receive the same kind of broadcasting funds or sponsorship funds as other top sports. And they are now facing a very uncertain season. The England netball is trying to work out whether we're going to have a season that's played entirely behind closed doors, whether we're going to have to move to central venues. How do we create biosecure bubbles in a sport where you have players who are working part-time? One of our players is a doctor at the RUH. So how do we manage all of this whilst trying to keep the sport going and trying to keep some engagement with the fans? So that's a big issue for netball, although we've had some light relief recently because 3 of our players were selected for England and they just played an international series in New Zealand, and it was very bizarre from this part of the world to watch international sport happening in that part of the world with full crowds. And it must have been fantastic for the players.
Yeah, I mean, certain things So typically when one hasn't done something, suddenly you appreciate it so much more. I remember I went to the first sort of live performance again, and you could clap again rather than clapping online. You clap and there's people clapping around. It almost brought tears to my eyes. You know, these sort of, golly, we are back, and I know we are now back in lockdown. But I think sometimes it also makes you appreciate of you know, the fun that is out there to be had, that we hopefully can return to. But before I open out to the audience, just a question to all four of you. You know, what do you want government to do? What's your one first thing that you'd ask government to do? A message that I could take back to government. By the way, of course, you know, we can be in constant communication, and please use me for your communication with government. But let's just talk about what would be your one thing that you'd ask government to do. Let's just go in the order of speaking. So Tarquin first, then Nick, then Liam, then Caroline.
Financial support. And there is the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, there is a process that's been underway with sports submitting information. But the sort of questions of what's on offer, how much and when, we don't hear anything back. So it's not just about rugby, it's not just about professional rugby. I think it is across sport. You've heard it from everyone this evening. There is a need for support for sport, or there will be long-term negative impacts for sports and across communities. So to lobby government to recognise the value of sport across all levels and to be forthcoming with that support. And I think there was a question in the chat about what supporters and fans can do, and you know, we'd encourage them to support that process as well, which is not dissimilar to the support which understandably was given to the arts sector you know, earlier in the year. But sport needs help, plain and simple.
Right. Nick, just the one thing about government, and Tarquin, let's come to the questions in the chat as well. I don't want to cut people off at this point. I just want to know what you want me to take back to government. We come to the questions in the chat
Sure.
after. So Nick, what's your one question? So for Tarquin, financial support, you can't survive without that, and the government needs to recognize that. So what about you, Nick?
We're lucky we're getting a little bit of financial support, at least for 3 months. But the second point is getting the fans back in. We're convinced you can get fans back in safely at a reasonable number. So we'd really like to see that. And in my day job, I look at the inconsistencies, because I run a visitor attraction and gets 750,000 people a year. And in the summer, we had 2,000-3,000 people carefully, safely in an attraction. And yet we weren't allowed more than about 15 in a football ground. And that other point, I think Liam said, you know, there's loopholes where you can watch a football game in a bar with a closed curtain on a screen, but you can't open the curtains and go and sit outside in the terraces. It's mad, the inconsistency.
Liam?
Obviously echo both Nick and Tarquin, but I think as well a roadmap, a clear roadmap as to how we are going to implement crowds back in, how the financial support will work. But forward plan, albeit I appreciate that's tough, but for me, we need to see some clarity of where we're going.
And Caroline?
Yep, I think I agree with all the previous speakers. I would say something around value, the value to people's mental health and well-being of exercising and being able to be inspired by sport that is taking place. I think when lockdown first started last time round, there was a complete vacuum for many people for whom sport was an inspiration, as well as an entertainment and a pastime. So something around value, but clear forward planning and consistency, because you know, being able to open pubs and allowing lots of people to go into the pubs whilst gyms were shut just didn't make sense to me.
Thank you. Well, I can't quite let you off, because now it comes to the question in the audience. So I hand over to Matt. I'm going to mute myself, and I'm looking forward to the crowd participation on Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much, Vera. Well, as was mentioned, the first question up was what, as fans, can we do to support local clubs? And I think Tarquin touched on that, is get behind, you've heard those messages there, get behind the requirements from government. Does anyone have any petitions going, or any communication with government that they, or does anyone want to add to things that the fans can do to help?
Yeah, there's definitely a Let the Fans Back In campaign through the EFL. So we've been pushing for that, and we encourage supporters to get on board with that, because we do feel controlled, sensible numbers should be coming back in now. So
is that on the EFL's website too?
I believe so, yeah.
Right, okay, well there we go. There's
all the FAs.
All the FAs. Let fans back in.
Can I just, now I said I was going to unmute myself, but you know what? Government petitions around these sort of things are very, very useful. So next week in Parliament, we are actually discussing sport and COVID consequences. And the more often we bring a minister into a Westminster Hall debate, because that's how it works with petitions, who have to answer these questions again and again, the better it is. So get behind the petition that's running now, but start another campaign or petition, and then the government has to discuss that again. So the more you bother people, politicians, and I tell you that as a politician, the more you get bothered, the more you ultimately have to respond. So these things do work. Sorry, Matt.
No, that's okay. There's a question and a mention from Lynn here. Whilst accepting that the point that transmission of the virus may be during the journey to an activity, Bath Croquet Club is a member-run club and is a sport that is played as a model for social distancing. Why is the government not considering the situation of individual sports for lockdown measures? I don't know if, have you heard anything, Vera, about why the government is lumping all sports together? Or
yeah, I mean, all sorts of people in the last week have got in touch with me to say, the art, why can't the archers continue? Why can't golf continue? Why can't croquet continue? Yeah, it's this idea that suddenly everything has to stop again because we were in a full government lockdown. And I would, agree with all of you. I was behind Nick and the Bath City Football Club to say, well, if you can bring a theatre back in a controlled way in September or October, which I greatly enjoy and I went, why not allow football clubs in a controlled way to bring back spectators? And I couldn't understand that. And indeed, we've been asking government again and again why they can't be a little bit more discerning. And I think the problem is indeed probably the lack of advances within certain departments in government. They have to suddenly respond, and possibly CMS, they just simply don't have the people who say, look, Minister, if you look at this, that, and the other, that could work. I mean, I'm not a government minister, but it is what I said before. We have to have these debates in Parliament so that we can make suggestions and sensible suggestions of bringing, saying, look, looking at this, surely this is perfectly COVID secure and safe. And I think what I said before as well, I think the main problem the government has is obviously spiraling numbers. Obviously, they listened to scientists and doctors, and the main problem is that hospitals will be overrun again if numbers of patients are increasing again. So that is unacceptable. It is unacceptable if ill people turn up in front of our hospitals and doctors would have to turn them away or make a choice of who to accept or who not to accept. For that reason, we have to lock down. That is the main reason, that too many people for what hospitals can cope with. That's why we had to lock down again. But in the forefield of all of this, it is indeed important to understand what is it that causes infection. And as I said before as well, I think the main problem is the unregulated and uncontrolled spaces. So where all venues are working very, very hard to say, we are COVID secure, we can do this, that, and the other. It's before you get there, before you get into a regulated space, or when you're coming out again, that is, I think, the main reason for infection. I think that is where the government has to put its mind to educate the public more how the virus spread. I'm frustrated that we haven't actually had a much better campaign about face coverings everywhere. Just wear it everywhere. I know it's not nice. I don't like it either, but it reduces the risk of spreading the virus by 80% if you are asymptomatic and carry the virus. And it reduces the risk of giving it to somebody else. Why is that message not out there? These are the things that have frustrated me.
There's been lots of comment, obviously, starting with Andrew, about the benefits of physical exercise, particularly outdoor exercise, in keeping people's immune systems up to speed and their mental well-being. Pointing out also that lockdown 1 we had some fantastic weather, but lockdown 2 now we're going into some dark winter months. And I think that sort of ties in with somebody called Stir Crazy, who's saying, surely it's vital that we now start planning at a government level for sport to be safely introduced for the masses, from professional sport right down to grassroots. I was just wondering if say the big clubs, the big venues like Bath Rugby, how do we plan to? You mentioned a little bit of it earlier, Tarquin. But what more should government be involved in planning that reintroduction of sport right down at the grassroots?
I think that government needs to be more open to listening and to finding solutions, working with the grassroots organisations, because and I forget who it was from the other speakers, but the sporting organisations are not cavalier. We have a significant sense of responsibility that we take in terms of how we go about what we do, whether that's in our elite environment or whether that's how we behave and how we operate in the environments we go into. So for us, that might be schools, that might be clubs. We're incredibly responsible in terms of how we do that. It's what we do every day. And whether it's Caroline, the team at the university, whether it's Nick and Bath City, it's a community-owned club, but there are experts in each of the clubs and the grassroots organisations in terms of being able to understand how to address problems. So I think and it is difficult with government, because obviously the volume of what's going on, I'm sure for them is very, very difficult to address. But if they could find a way of having enough space to, as opposed to imposing something in a blanket way, to be able to take on board what the advice, if you like, and what they're told by the grassroots organisations, then potentially there's a route to having a different approach. And it is critical. I think the comments about mental well-being, it doesn't matter whether it's from Samaritans or any organisation which provides support. The number of calls, the demand had gone up significantly through COVID. And we're now heading into a period where the days are shorter and it's darker, and that might seem like a small thing, but it's a significant, significant difference. And I think people are weary. There's a weariness. Here we go again. And so anything that can promote wellness, well-being, mental well-being is significant. And sport is such a huge, huge part of that. And organised sport, whether that's a club or a membership, is really key. So I would really encourage the government to ask and not just tell sports sectors and organisations in terms of how we can operate in a safe way.
Thank you. Nick or Caroline, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I can come in if you like.
Yeah.
I think, there is dialogue going on between the DCMS and umbrella organisations like UK Sport and Sport England. It is, and the national governing bodies of sport themselves are trying hard to be creative in the ways in which they can bring people back to their sports safely. So I think there are channels which local clubs can go through to continue to encourage the national governing bodies and those umbrella bodies to act on behalf of sport. I would say the Youth Sport Trust is doing a huge amount of campaigning about young people's ability to be able to be active outside of school, because the level of PE provision in schools is you know, at an all-time low. So I think there are organisations that are there for support. It's just that we need to continue to lobby them and support them.
It's just taking a long time, I think, Caroline. I think that's the frustration. Yeah. You know, we've all been pushing for a long time. And I completely agree with Tarquin. I think it's a political thing. It can't all be top down. They need to listen a bit more and be slightly more flexible. But I agree. I mean, there's so much going on. It's tough. But I think that listening point is the key one.
Mm.
Johnny, good. I had some questions come in to me. But it's about re-establishing the amateur game, which I think we've probably covered. How important, there's another one here, how important is the knowledge of continuing high levels of support to a club as we head towards the 2021 season, and for long-term planning given financial difficulties facing professional clubs? So how do you, as big clubs or clubs, keep your support going? I don't know, Tarquin or Nick, how do you keep, what if, how do you stop losing fans whilst there's nothing going on?
Yeah, I mean, a key, you know, engagement is a word that people bandy around quite a lot, but engagement's really is really key. So when we were in lockdown 1, we recreated a match day around the rhythm of the games, even though the games weren't happening. And we showed, you know, recent classic games, obviously wins, you know, that we broadcast, and we had 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people, you know, for some of those games logging into to use them, to watch them rather. We, you know, in terms of, you know, some of the questions that have been raised around wellness, there are, you know, other things we did. Our chef, particularly when he was less busy, when players were at home and not in, you know, we created some lockdown lunches content, you know, so we're trying to find all sorts of different ways to keep fans engaged, whether that's around the games themselves or whether that's around just, in a broader sense, relationship with the club and ways in which we can create content that can, you know, that can help. I think the piece that was really encouraging, because you just don't know, was when we had the test pilot event that was cancelled at the 11th hour. There was such excitement for people to be coming in. You know, it was 1,000 supporters who were coming in to the Rec to watch that game. There was such excitement that it gave me great confidence that people do want sport. There hasn't been a loss or turning away from sport. I think it's such a, you know, we've obviously focused on the, you know, the well-being, if you like, of doing the sport, but I think there's something significant here about this coming together of people, and whether that happens at the netball. And Caroline, I was lucky to be at well, it feels like a long time ago now, but you know, a great game of netball. It was, you know, it was probably 6-9 months ago now. Or whether it's, you know, Bath City, where, you know, there's great noise, Nick, you know, when I've sort of been there in the past, or obviously at Bath Rugby, which is a huge congregation of people in the city. I think it's, you know, it is representative of that basic need to come together and to share something together, that thing that obviously social distancing means we can't do. And so, you know, we can talk about the moments of sport and the winning. I think there's also something about, it's just, you know, it goes to the core of being part of a community, and it's that coming together which is so important and vital. So, you know, for us, in terms of engaging, communication is key, and you know, and speaking to supporters, and not just about the sporting matters, as I say, but about some of the other issues that people face. So that's a role that we all continue to play.
Caroline, you mentioned in the comments, you mentioned that 2,000 fans per match for a Team Bath Arena for netball, and I have to say, you know, so the same question to you is, how do you keep fans engaged? Although my experience of coming up there was when my son was doing judo, and of course all the parents are sat around the edge. So it's how do you keep that? You know, how do you remind people that all that's going to be going on at some point in the future?
I think Tarquin's made a huge point about sport, which, you know, I've played sport most of my life. A large part of sport is that social gathering, whether it's parents on the touchline or parents watching judo or whatever, that will come back. We have to have hope and optimism that that will come back. In terms of how we, within the netball franchise, have kept in contact with the fans, well, we ran all the way through the summer a Tuesday night is netball night, online fitness. So one of our Super League players ran that every week all the way through the summer for about 14 weeks. And netball clubs across the region joined in, as did our fans. So that was a super way of keeping in touch. Now the netball fans are wondering whether there are actually going to be any matches. And as I said before, that big dialogue is going on at national level about how to run the 2021 season, which is due to start in the first week of February. At the Team Bath Sports Training Village, in between the two lockdowns, we had very clear protocols for parents, and we had to put in place a lot of safeguarding measures to pick up children that were coming in for activities at the front door with the requisite number of adults, take them to the space in which they were playing their sport or doing their activity, and then take them back to the front door. So I'm sure the parents themselves missed out on a bit of the socialising at that point, Matt.
And I just got one other thing coming in, from just sort of almost on from that, in terms of the number of people coming into the city to take part in events. Is it possible to quantify that loss to the city? I mean, I think maybe Bath Rugby's done something to try and quantify how many people eat in the city first. But I was just going to check with Liam, just to bring Liam in. I'm assuming when you've got big events going on that actually people are staying in the city, or you're bringing a lot of people in for overnights. I mean, is that quantifiable at all, about the loss to the city?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, we were looking at some analytics last week, actually, and across kind of our general sort of ticket base. But bearing in mind, you have to sort of be quite open-minded, because with particular racing, it tends to be quite large groups that will book. So therefore, you may have one person that will book 20 tickets, will only necessarily have engaged with that one person. But ordinarily, particularly for Bath Racecourse, around 30% of our ticket base are not from the area, which is outside a 20-mile radius. And I think particularly with Bath being quite a sort of tourist destination, I think a lot of people do tend to tie that in with the racing experience and staying local. We're certainly short of hotels, particularly this side of Lansdowne. I'm sure they've opened up quite recently, but I wouldn't have an exact figure, but to quantify it is something that our analytical team would do, to see exactly what that would bring locally to the economy and how people would be staying overnight and, like you say, eating locally, using local amenities.
And Tarquin and Nick, I'm assuming fans come in they have a meal locally and then go and watch the match.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it's even if it's whether it's home supporters, certainly, you know, Bath is everyone's favourite second club as well because of the location, and you know, whether it's family members who would come in to eat and shop and take part in other activities, you know, supporters will have their routine of a place to eat before the game or after the game. So the club generates around 20 million of £20 million of economic value for the city each year, which obviously we're incredibly proud to do. At the moment, that won't be there because obviously there are no crowds coming in, and that feeds into obviously employment locally. So I think sport is obviously this is a historic city, it's a tourist destination, but you know, you have a fantastic sporting institution, the university, you've got the Racecourse, fantastic institution as well, Bath City, a fantastic community-owned club. That, you know, sport is a significant part of city life, and that's both in terms of being able to watch and partake in sport and the contribution that it generates in the economy. So at this time when each of these organisations is struggling, that has a knock-on effect on the city as well, that continues for as long as, you know, to Nick's point, the cheapest, lowest cost form of support the government can give is to allow crowds in, we're not actually asking, we wouldn't be asking for money, you know, if we can find a way, and we know we can do it safely, certainly at reduced levels, to bring crowds back in. And clearly that doesn't just benefit the clubs, it benefits the city, the economy, employment as well.
Nick, did you want to add to?
No, not much, except I think Tarquin has hit the nail on the head. I mean, if the club now generates that 20 million, you're probably adding the rest of us together, we might get another 15 on top of that. So you're talking 35 million economic value to the city. Yeah,
so I mean, there's the economic value, but you alluded earlier to the role of Bath City FC at the heart of the community in Twerton. There's a value beyond finance.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's that Tarquin touched on it again. You talk about engagement with the fans, but the community is absolutely vital as well. And we help where we can and do what we can. But it's been squeezed in the lockdown, as we said, with the Citizens Advice Legal Clinic having to be shut, the food pantries being shut. So we've added new things in. We've definitely lost some. So we want to get back being able to contribute more.
And on those points, there's some good points from Catherine here on school sports and the lack of them at the moment, and the importance of them. And in terms of obviously of clubs and organisations making a lot of noise and letting everybody know they're there for activities. Just Lynn, well done. The Bath Croquet Association is there for you if croquet is what you fancy. Once we're all allowed out again. I've got one last question here, really for everybody, I guess. So looking at everything you do as clubs and venues, can we learn to live with COVID? A lot of people say that COVID's just going to be around forever and we've got to learn to live with it. In terms of what you have been able to do so far, can sport learn to live with COVID? Nick, you're up first. You're still on the screen there.
I would simply say yes. I mean, we're lucky in a strange way in that we have plenty of capacity at Twerton. We only have average crowds of about 1,100. You can spread them around the ground. We could almost have a capacity crowd, but do it safely. And that's part of the frustration. Tarquin would struggle to get his normal crowds in there, but you get a decent number in and spread them around. Whereas I think we have to learn to live with it. With or without a vaccine, with or without test and tracing, that's going to get better, but we can certainly live with it and manage it.
Tarquin, can a Premiership rugby club learn to live with COVID?
Well, I think that, I mean, if COVID continues, then, you know, it's not a question of choice, it's a question of need, that becomes part of our lives. And I think the question then is, you know, living with it, kind of what does that mean? Does that mean that we have to continue as distanced with the practices that we currently have? And if the answer to that is yes, then, you know, for sport to live with it, it's a radical change in terms of the business model of sport, because at the moment 2/3 of our income comes from people attending games, and then, you know, without that number of people attending, then, you know, there's radical questions to be asked around the business model and around the cost base, and around, does it become a different type of sport, which actually it's primarily about people watching on TV or online, whichever direction broadcast goes, which could be a route to go down. But, you know, as we were saying earlier, one of the key things is those moments of people coming together, and you see it here at the Rep, people who sat together, they shared the experience, friends who actually the time that they meet and they get away from work and family or home or whatever it may be is when they see their friend at the game that they go to watch, and they have that shared experience. So if COVID continues, of course, we have to learn to live with it. But I think there's a risk that there's some significant and cherished moments and, you know, fundamentally human shared experiences that we risk losing. And I think that's incredibly sad. The adaptation can be done, but the potential knock-on effect, I think, is things that we lose, which would be sad.
Caroline, in terms of taking that sport down to little local clubs using facilities? Can Team Bath, the sports village, learn to live with COVID?
I think, between the lockdowns, we have been living with COVID. I would say the answer to that question for us is multi-layered, because it depends on the sport and the level at which it's being played. It's much tougher for the contact sports at community level, like rugby, like judo, because of the way the sport the virus is transmitted. But I would say, yes, we can learn to live with it. And then if you look at our netball matches, we can get a third of our crowd into our venue safely under COVID protocols, but it wouldn't be quite the same. And as Tarquin has said, what do we do then with the business model? Because although the university supports this fabulous, largely women's sport, with some underpinning finances, a large part of our revenue comes from ticket sales as well. So how do you replace those ticket sales, and do you go to an online model where people pay to view a stream or whatever? So all of those are complicated things that we would have to go into. But we managed it between the lockdowns. The swimming pool opened, swimming clubs came back. The tennis courts were the first to open. The ones that we've struggled to get going are university level rugby, for instance, because the protocols are different to Premiership rugby. So it's a multi-layered question for us, but I would say yes. Humans are basically ingenious, aren't they? So we will find a way somehow to make it happen.
And Liam, I mean, you've been able to hold events up at the Racecourse during between the lockdowns. So surely that means just a nod from government, and you can live with COVID and create a safe environment for horse racing fans.
Exactly that, absolutely. You know, in the sense of the venue enhancing its infrastructure to be able to deliver that is of course possible. And certainly, to Caroline's point as well, you know, humanity is very adaptable, I think, and businesses are as well. And where there's a will, there's certainly a way. But also actually from the physical side of horse racing as well, as an elite sport, ensuring that the welfare of our stable staff and jockeys and of horses as well, and the movement, because not forgetting, you know, particularly with many horses in the country, they won't be on the doorstep of Bath Racecourse. They may come from Newmarket, Lambourne, they'll come from all over the country. So it's ensuring that we can actually support that and actually deliver a safe mechanism to allow the transportation, but of course, the physical side.
So you just adapt and learn to live with COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. There was one final note I see from the thing, that we haven't really represented cricket tonight. We don't have a big sort of cricket venue, but lots of small clubs, and I indeed managed a youth cricket team up at Hampstead for a while. So and we saw that cricket was able to come back as a sport, and obviously I'd just like to say the importance of cricket. And if we're going to have a season next summer, let's get some nets going. That's the schools and the smaller clubs and the smaller facilities. We get some nets going over the winter. I'm sure, as everyone said, we can arrange to do that safely and hopefully plan for a season next summer. But that's about it for questions. So Vera, I'll hand back to you.
Well, thank you, Matt. I want to thank my panel, Caroline, Tarquin, Nick, and Liam, for your very interesting insights. And I want to say to everybody up in the audience, whether cricket or you know, with my office, and if you want to have a chat with me about your particular situation, absolutely, I'm here to take your messages. This was also much sort of profile that we've got so many wonderful sporting venues, sporting activities across the city, and the huge sports play to our communities, to our life, our well-being. So you know, my eyes and ears are open to what you want to bring to. Please get in touch with I'm having all the conversations you want me to have. I want to end this evening also on on a positive note, we are in lockdown. You know, it is a very difficult moment for all of us, but what would we do without hope? And I was, you know, very grateful to all of my panelists to hear the message of hope that you can all adapt. We as people are incredibly ingenious to adapt, but also a message maybe to the people who are making the decisions to say, in the meantime, there are things that can help all of our sporting venues and sporting activities to adapt. And that is what Tarquin called a roadmap, something that allows all organizations to plan better. And not always being faced with the absolute last minute decision. And I will certainly happily take that back. My other thing is that I hear that the government had prepared certain things, for example, around travel plans to sporting events. And if we had the conversation about what do people do in the unregulated spaces, or can we regulate even a little bit more about people's lives as long as they understand what it is that makes our own behavior safer, then that would be also a message that I'm happy to spread. And I think when people are asking what can we do to support sports and sporting clubs and sporting activities, it's about, again, checking very carefully our own behavior around COVID. It is a new virus, this is a new understanding of what we can do as people. But I think I still believe we all can make sure that we support each other and we support our great sporting activities, venues, organizations, and they're doing so much for us. Let's give something back and behave sensibly. Once we are coming out of the lockdown, can hopefully enjoy at least in a smallish way as we come out sports activities again. But let's make sure that we don't go from lockdown, out of lockdown into lockdown again, but keep going as we are living with still a lethal virus. Hopefully we find a vaccine, but it could be that we don't, or that the vaccine doesn't quite work. So let's think at least about a more severe scenario where we have to live with a virus, but we can do it. And it was great to hear from all of you and giving us some insights of how you think that could be done. So thank you again, everybody. I can't say have a safe journey home, but have a safe click out of the Zoom. Enjoy your evening, and we see you again. Thank you to my team as well for organizing these events, and look out for our next community conversation. Thank you very much. Good night.